inside of a clay pot. They were very important for like day-to-day use. And just like that, like you are, well, let me just say this. A jar of clay is certainly not special in the sense of being showy, right? You're probably not going to find a jar of clay on a shelf in like a palace or a castle somewhere. You're going to see like candelabras and great chandeliers and all kinds of fancy decorative things. In a sense, though, they're not worthless compared to other materials either. And you're not either. You're more important than those glitzy materials or materials that are of little value. In fact, there were other materials that were used sometimes like wood or skin or straw, but those things didn't last as long. They didn't stand up. You know why? Because what happened was when clay was put together and then it was put into a kiln, that fire made it strong. It strengthened the materials so that they were not going to just fall apart. In fact, if you went out to Israel and you did like an archaeological dig today, guess what you would still find? You would find shards of clay. Ethan and I, we went to Mitchell, South Dakota. There's a prehistoric Indian village that they are unearthing there in Mitchell. And it's really, really fascinating because you're like standing up above and down below they're like, they've got these areas squared off. And, they take their little tools and they can only dig like a little bit at a time, But what they find is all of a sudden they'll come across this big open hole almost. You can tell the dirt in there is a little different. You know what anthropologists and archaeologists, I should say anthropologists really do? Is they look through people's ancient trash, is what they do. And what these holes were, is it's the place where when things broke down, they would throw those things, and then eventually they'd just bury it up. So what they find is these fragments, these shards of clay. The wood and the skins and all that have like decomposed. But those clay fragments are still there in those pots. And while a gold vase may sit on a shelf and be encased in glass and only used for impressing guests, or perhaps even sitting in storage and collecting dust, a jar of clay is useful. Jars of clays were used on a daily basis, and they served an important purpose in the service of the one that they belonged to. They were needed to transport liquids, and as I said, serve things as well. And I don't know if you've noticed, if you're a student of the Bible, you probably noticed that there's this overarching theme throughout the Bible of a potter and pottery. And even in Genesis, when we get this picture of God, we see that he formed his creation. And I really believe that is a picture of what a potter would do and what people would understand. Hey, Amy, I'm gonna skip. I'd love to do the video right now if we can do that. So I just want to show you guys this video. This kind of gives the idea of a potter and some of the verses that are in the Bible about a potter and pottery. If you want to turn the volume up just a tad. There's just something about seeing that visually, isn't there? I mean, I just look at that and I see, especially at the end when he's bringing that pot out, and all of a sudden there's like probably hundreds of pots out there that he's created. Each one of them unique, right? Everyone different. There's still a crafting that takes place. There's still a design. There's still a uniqueness to each pot. Even if the pots are the same design, still being handmade like that, they're not exactly the same. Every single one of those pots has a reason, whether it's just the beauty of the pot or it was made for a very specific purpose. They've recently discovered these pots. They're called hippo jars in the ancient Near East. That they're saying these were used for administrative purposes, for documents. Like, every pot has a reason, has a purpose. And I love that verse that says, who is the pot to say to the potter? Who is the pot to say to the potter? And I forget what the question was there. But what's that? That he knows nothing. He knows nothing. God knew exactly what he was doing when he created you. He knew exactly what he was doing. And all of us, we can look at our flaws and go, I don't like that about myself. But you were still very intentionally designed by the Lord, by the Maker, by the Potter. So how can we say to him, God, why did you make me like this? What am I worth? So as we think about this, like, in this year ahead, like, what does this mean? Like, knowing that we're a jar of clay, how does that prepare us for 2018, for the new year? Well, first and foremost, like, when we acknowledge that we are a humble container for Christ's glorious presence, then we are truly ready to be useful to God. To the God who loves us and loves to use the most ordinary people to do the most extraordinary things. That's the start. Knowing that is the beginning. Then there's a couple commitments that we need to make once we know that this is true. The first commitment is the commitment of allowing God to shape us, to fill us, and sometimes to pour us out. It's saying, God, you can use me for whatever you created me for. I'm not going to question it. God, use me. I am yours. I belong to the potter, to be used by the owner. And let me tell you this, that the biggest blessings in your life will come from that place where you say, God, I'm yours. Use me as you will. And that's when God will use us as part of this inbreaking kingdom that we've been talking about this Christmas season. Because when we allow the potter to use us for his purpose, which he formed us for, that's when we do the most damage to the enemy and to the enemy's schemes. Because God wants us to join with him in his purposes. The opposite of this is being committed to our own happiness. It never works, really. I mean, we're kind of seeing this in our society right now. I'm always reading about, helicopter parenting. I'm a parent, so I'm reading articles on parenting, and this is a common thing right now where parents are so involved in their kids' lives that they don't let the kids make their own decisions sometimes. They're not letting them fail. And kids, as they're growing older, they're miserable. They don't know how to make their own choices, They're just trying to be happy. And their parents have tried to make them happy, and it hasn't worked. And instant gratification, especially having instant communication and instant entertainment in the palm of our hands now, And it doesn't work. We're seeing greater rates of depression now among this generation that's growing up with these things. And of course, all of us have seen and heard stories of very successful people that are like at the top of their game and they're making the most money in their lives, and yet they're miserable, right? We know that that is not it. Seeking our own happiness without the purpose and plans of God will leave us absolutely spiritually bankrupt. So the first commitment is committing to allow God to use us as He will. The second commitment is this. It's the commitment to seeing Christ formed in us through suffering. Through suffering that comes our way, rather than being committed to a pain-free life. You can try to live a pain-free life. You can try to avoid loss and suffering, but I can guarantee that there is not a single person that is going to live a pain-free life, as much as we try to avoid it. Listen to these verses in 2 Corinthians here. Verses 8 and 9. Paul said, we're hard-pressed on every side, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but we are not in despair. We are persecuted, but we have not been abandoned. We are struck down, but we are not destroyed. There is a man who knew his God and could look to his God despite the things that came his way. And Paul will tell you, he went through a lot of junk in his life. He went through a lot of abandonment. He went through a lot of pain. He went through a lot of persecution. He was shipwrecked. All this stuff that happened to him on his journey. And yet he can say, because he knows who he is in God, that those things can't bring him down. Verses 16 through 18, listen to this. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away. Yep, I feel that. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day after day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. See, he had just different lenses. Some of us, we're looking at what's right in front of us. And that thing can bring us down. It can pull us under. But Paul says, I look beyond that. I'm fixing my eyes on something that I can't see. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen